The Prophet and the Country. The Portent. Horace, Ode 20, Book 5. O late withdrawn from humankind, and following dreams we never knew, Verus, what dream has fate assigned to trouble you? Such virtue as commends the law, of virtue to the vulgar horde, suffices not, you needs must draw a righteous sword, and, flagrant in well-doing, smite the priests of Bacchus at their fane, lest any worshipper invite the god again. Whence public strife and naked crime, and deadlier than the cup you shun, a people schooled to mock in time, all law, not one. Cease then to fashion state-made sin, nor give thy children cause to doubt that virtue springs from iron within, not lead without. The Prophet and the Country. North of London stretches a country called the Midlands, filled with brick cities, all absolutely alike, but populated by natives who, through heredity, have learned not only to distinguish between them, but even between the different houses, so that at meals and at evening multitudes return, without confusion or scandal, each to the proper place. Last summer, desperate need forced me to cross that area, and I fell into a motor license control, which began in a market town filled with unherded beeves, carrying red-numbered tickets on their rumps. An English-speaking policeman inspected my license on a bridge, while the cattle blundered and blew round the car. A native in plain clothes lolled out an enormous mulberry-colored tongue, with which he licked a numbered label, precisely like one of those on the behinds of the bullocks, and made to dab it on my windscreen. I protested. "But it will save you trouble," he said. "You're liable to be held up for your license from now on. This is your protection. Everybody does it." "Oh, if that's the case," I began weakly. He slapped it on the glass and I went forward. The man was right. All the cars I met were protected, as mine was, till I reached some country or other which marked the limit of the witch-doctoring, and entered, at twilight, a large featured land where the Great North Road ran, bordered by wide way-wastes, between clumps of old timber. Here the car, without warning, sobbed and stopped. One does not expect the make and break of the magneto, that tiny 2-inch spring of finest steel, to fracture, and by the time we had found the trouble, night shut down on us. A rounded pile of woods ahead took one sudden star to its forehead and faded out. The way-waste melted into the darker velvet of the hedge. Another star reflected itself in the glassy black of the bitumed road, and a weak moon struggled up out of a mist patch from a valley. Our lights painted the grass unearthly greens and the tree boles bone white. A church clock struck 11 as I curled up in the front seat and awaited the progress of time and things, with some notion of picking up a toe towards morning. It was long since I had spent a night in the open, and the hour worked on me. Time was when such nights, and the winds that heralded their dawns, had been fortunate and blessed, but those gates, I thought, were forever shut. I diagnosed it as a baker's van on a Ford chassis, lit with unusual extravagance. It pulled up and asked what the trouble might be. The first sentence sufficed, even had my lights not revealed the full hairless face, the horn-rimmed spectacles, the hooded boots below, and the soft hat, fashioned on no block known to the Eastern trade, above the yellow raincoat. I explained the situation. The resources of Mr. Henry Ford's machines did not run to spare parts of my car's type, but it was a beautiful night for camping out. He himself was independent of hotels. His outfit was a caravan hired these months past for tours of Great Britain. He had been alone since his wife died of duodenal ulcer 5 years ago. Comparative ethnology was his present study. No, not a professor, nor, indeed, ever at any college, but a realtor, a dealer in real estate in a suburb of the great and cultured center of Omaha, Nebraska. Had I ever heard of it? I had once visited the very place, and there had met an unforgettable funeral furnisher, but I found myself, under influence of the night and my demon, denying all knowledge of the United States. I had, I said, never left my native land, but the passion of my life had ever been the study of the fortunes and future of the USA, and to this end I had joined 3 societies, each of which regularly sent me all its publications. He jerked her onto the grass beside my car, where our mingled lights slashed across the trunks of a little wood, and I was invited into his pitch pine-lined caravan with its overpowering electric installation, its flap table, typewriter drawers, and lockers below the bunk. Then he spoke, every word well relished between massy dentures, the inky-rimmed spectacles obscuring the eyes and the face as expressionless as the unrelated voice. He spoke in capital letters, a few of which I have preserved, on our national spirit, which he had sensed was homogeneous and in ethical contact throughout, unconscious but vitally existent. That was his estimate of our racial complex. It was an asset, but a democracy postulating genuine ideals should be more multitudinously minded and diverse in outlook. I assented to everything in a voice that would have drawn confidences from letterboxes. He next touched on the collective outlook of democracy, and thence glanced at herd impulse, and the counterbalancing necessity for individual self-expression. Here he began to search his pockets, sighing heavily from time to time. Before my wife died, sir, I was rated a 100% American. I am now, but have you ever in our literature read a book called The Man Without a Country? I'm him. He still rummaged, but there was a sawing noise behind the face. And you may say, first and last, drink did it, he added. The noise resumed. Evidently he was laughing, so I laughed too. After all, if a man must drink, what better lair than a caravan? At his next words I repented. On my return back home after her burial, I first received my primal urge towards self-expression. Till then I had never realized myself. Ah. He had found it at last in a breast pocket, a lank and knotty cigar. And what, sir, is your genuine opinion of prohibition? He asked when the butt had been moistened to his liking. Oh, it's a gallant adventure, I babbled, for somehow I had turned myself to listen in to tales of other things. He turned towards me slowly. The revelation qua prohibition that came to me on my return back home from her funeral was not along those lines. This is the platform I stood on. I became thenceforward one of the vast crowds being addressed from that platform. There are races, sir, which have been secluded since their origin from the microbes, the necessary and beneficent microbes of civilization. Once those microbes are introduced to them, those races react precisely in proportion to their previous immunity or racial virginity. Measles, which I've had twice and never laid by for, are as fatal to the Papuan as pneumonic plague to the white. Alcohol for them is disaster, degeneration, and death. Why? You can't get ahead of cause and effect. Protect any race from its natural and God-given bacteria, and you automatically create the culture for its decay, when that protection is removed. That, sir, is my thesis. The unlit cigar between his lips circled slowly, but I had no desire to laugh. The virgin red Indian fell for the firewater of the pale-face as soon as it was presented to him. For firewater, sir, he parted with his lands, his integrity, and his fortune. What is he now? An ethnological survival under state protection. You get me? Immunize or virginize the citizen of the United States to alcohol, and you surely reduce him to the mental status, an outlook of that redskin. That is the nemesis of prohibition. And the process has begun, sir. Haven't you noticed it already? He gulped. Among our people? Well, I said, men don't always act as they preach, of course. You won't abrade my national complex. What's the worst you've seen in connection with our people and rum? The round lenses were full on me. I chanced it. I've seen one of 'em on a cross-channel boat, talking prohibition in the bar, pretty full. He had 3 drinks while I listened. I thought you said you'd never quit England, he replied. Oh, we don't count France, I amended hastily. Then was you ever at Monte Carlo? No. Well, I was, this spring. One of our tourist steamers unloaded 300 of them at the port of Ville-Franche, and they went off to Monte Carlo to dine. I saw 'em, sir, come out of the dinner hall of that vast hotel opposite the casino there, not drunk, but all avin drink taken, in that hotel lounge after the meal. I saw an elderly citizen up and kiss 8 women, none of 'em specially young, sittin' in a circle on the settees. The rest of his crowd applaudin'. Folk just shrugged their shoulders, and the French nigger on the door, I heard him say, "It's only the Yanks tankin' up." It galled me. As a 100% American, it galled me unspeakably, and you've observed the same thing during the last few years. I nodded. The face was working now in the yellow lights reflected from the closed-buttoned raincoat. He dropped his hand on his knee and struck it again and again before he steadied himself with the usual snap and grind of his superb dentist work. My revelation qua the peril of prohibition was laid on me on my return back home in the hour of my affliction. I'd been discussin' prohibition with Mrs. Tarworth only the week before. Her best friend, sir, a neighbor of ours, had filled one of the vases in our parlor with chrysanthemums out of a bust wreath. I can't ever smell to those flowers now, 'thout it all comin' back. Yes, sir, in my hour of woe it was laid on me to warn my land of the nemesis of presumption. There's only one sin in the world, and that is presumption. Without strong presumption, sir, we'd never have fixed prohibition the way we did. And when I retired that night, I reasoned out that there was but one weapon for me to work with to convey my message to my native land. That, sir, was the movies. So I reasoned it. I reasoned it so. Now, the movies wasn't a business I'd ever been interested in, though a regular attendant. Well, sir, within 10 days after I had realized the scope and imperativeness of my revelation, I sold out and reinvested, so everything was available. I quit Omaha, sir, the freest, the happiest man in the United States. A puff of air from the woods licked through the open door of the caravan, trailing a wreath of mist with it. He pushed home the door. So you started in on anti-prohibition films, I suggested? Sir, more! It was laid on me to feature the murder of immunized America by the microbe of modern civilization, which she had presumptuously defied. That text inspired all the tilting. Before I arrived at the concept of the appeal, I was months studying the movie business in every state of our Union, in labor and travail. The complete concept, sir, with its potentialities, came to me of a Sunday afternoon in Rand Park, Keokuk, Iowa, the center of our native pearl-button industry. As a boy, sir, I used to go on shell-tonguin' after mussels in a shanty boat on the Cumberland River, Tennessee, always hoping to find $1,000 pearl. The shell goes to Keokuk for manufacture. I found my pearl in Keokuk, where my concept came to me. Excuse me. He pulled out a drawer of card-indexed photographs beneath the bunk, ran his fingers down the edges, and drew out 3. The verse showed the head of an elderly Red Indian chief in full war paint, the lined lips compressed to a thread, eyes wrinkled, nostrils aflare, and the whole face lit by so naked a passion of hate that I started. That, said Mr. Tarworth, is the spirit of the tragedy, both of the Red Indians who initially, and of our whites who subsequently sold themselves and their heritage for the firewater of the paleface. The captions run in diapason with that note throughout. But for a film appeal, you must have a balanced leitmotif interwoven with the footage. Now this close-up of the red man I'm showing you punctuates the action of the drama. He recurs, sir, watching the progressive degradation of his own people, from the advent of the paleface with liquor, up to the extinction of his race. After that you see him again, more and more dominant, brooding over a rejoicing in the downfall of the white American, artificially revirginized against alcohol. The identical cycle repeated. I got this shot of him in Oklahoma, one of our western states, where there's a crowd of the richest Red Indians, drawing oil royalties, on earth. But they've got a historical society that chases them into paint and feathers to keep up their race pride, and for the movies. He was an Episcopalian, and owns a Cadillac, I was told. The sun in his eyes makes him look that way. He's indexed as rum in the cup. That's the element of popular appeal. But say, the voice softened with the pride of artistry, ain't he just it for my purposes? He passed me the second photo. The cigar rolled again and he held on. Now in every film appeal, you must balance your leitmotif by balancing the sexes. The American woman, sir, handed prohibition to us while our boys were away savin' you. I know the type, born and bred with it. She watches throughout the film that she's brought about, watches and watches till the final catastrophe. She's woman triumphant, balance against rum in the cup, the degraded male. I hunted the whole of the Middle West for her in vain, for I remembered, not Jordan, but Abana and Parfar, Mrs. Tarworth's best friend at home. I was then in Texarkana, Arkansas, fixin' up a deal I'll tell you about, but I broke for Omaha that evening to get a shot of her. When I arrived so sudden, she thought, I guess, I meant to make her number 2. That's her. You wouldn't realize the type. I looked, saw the trained sweetness and unction in the otherwise hardish, ignorant eyes, the slightly open, slightly flaccid mouth, the immense unconscious arrogance, the immovable certitude of mind, and the other warning signs in the poise of the broad-cheeked head. He was fingering the third photo. And when the American woman realizes the scope and the impact and the irrevocability of the catastrophe which she has created by her presumption, she deregisters despair. That's her at the finale. It was cruelty beyond justification to have pinned down any living creature in such agony of shame, anger, and impotence among life's wreckage. And this was a well-favored woman, her torment new launched on her as she stood gripping the back of a stamped velvet chair. "And so you went back to Texarkana without proposing?" I began. "Why, yes. There was only 47 minutes between trains. I told her so, but I got both shots." I must have caught my breath, for as he took the photo back again, he explained, "In the movie business, we don't employ the actool. This is only the basis we build to the nearest professional type. That secures controlled emphasis of expression. She's only the basis." "I'm glad of that," I said. He lit his cigar and relaxed beneath the folds of the loose coat. "Well, sir, having secured my leitmotifs and sex balances, the whole of the footage covering the downfall of the red man was as good as given me by a bus congregational church that had been boosting prohibition near Texarkana. That was why I'd gone there. One of their ladies, who was crazy about our national dealings with the Indian, had had the details documented in Washington, and the resultant film must have cost her any God's dollars you can name. It was all there, the red man parting with his lands and furs and women to the early settlers for rum, the liquor fights around the trading posts, the government agents swindling them with liquor, and the Indians going mad from it, the Black Hawk War, the winning of the West, by rum mainly, the whole jugful of shame. But that film failed, sir, because folk in Arkansas said it was an aspersion to the national honor, and anyway, buying land needful for our inevitable development was more Christian than the bloody wars of the monarchical Europe. The Congregationalists wanted a new organ too, so I traded a big Etsy organ for their film. My notion was to interweave it with parallel modern instances from Monte Carlo and the European hotels of white American degradation, the main caption being, "The firewater of the paleface works as indifferently as fate." And old rum in the cup's close-up shows broodin' through it all. You sense my concept. He relit his cigar. I saw it like a vision, but from there on, I had to rely on my own complex for intuition. I cut out all modern side issues, the fight against prohibition, bootlegging, homemade rum manufacture, wood alcohol tragedies, and all that dope. Dunno as I didn't eliminate to excess. The revolt of the red blood corpuscles should have been stressed. What's their share in it? Vital! They clean up waste and deleterious matter in the humane system. Under the microscope they rage like lions. Deprive them of their job by sterilizing and virginizing the system, and the red blood corpuscles turn on the humane system and destroy it bodily. Mentally too, maybe. Ain't that a hell of a thought? Where did you get it from? It came to me with the others. He replied as simply as Ezekiel might have told a fellow captive beside Shabar. But it's too high for a democracy, so I cut it right out. For film purposes, I assumed that, at an unspecified date, the United States had become virginized to liquor. The taint was out of the blood, and apparently, the instinct had aborted. The triumph of presumption is the caption. But from there on, I fell down because, for the film appeal, you cannot present such an epoch without featuring confirmatory exhibits which, of course, haven't as yet materialized. That meant that the whole cultural aspect of that civilization of the future would have to be built up at Hollywood, and $500,000 wouldn't cover it. The vision of virginized civilization. A hell of a proposition, but it doesn't matter now. He dropped his head and was still for a little while. Never mind, I said. How does the idea work out in your mind? In my mind? As inevitably, sir, as the red man's fall through rum. My notion was a complete cultural exposé of a she-dominated civilization, built on a virginal basis qua alcohol, with immensely increased material productivity. Say, there'd be money in that from big businesses demonstrating what they'll produce 100 years hence, and a sidewipe at the practically non-existent birth rate. Why that too, I asked. He gave me the reason, a perfectly sound one, which has nothing to do with the tale, and went on. After that vision is fully realized, the end comes as remorselessly for the white as for the red. How? The American woman, you will recall the first close-up of that lady I showed you, interweaving throughout the narrative, having accomplished all she set out to do, wishes to demonstrate to the world the integral significance of her life work. Why not? She's never been blamed in her life. So deliberately, out of high presumption, the American woman withdraws all inhibitory legislation, all barriers against alcohol, to show what she has made of her men. The captions here run, "The zenith of presumption. America stands by herself, guide and savior of humanity. Let evil do its damnedest. We are above it. Say, ain't that a hell of a thought? A bit extravagant, isn't it? Extravagance? In the life of actual men and women, it doesn't exist. Well, anyway, that's my top note before the debacle. There's an interval while the great world wave is gathering to sweep aside the children of presumption. Nothing eventuates for a while. The machine of virginized civilization functions by its own stored energy. And then, sir, then the world wave crashes down on the white as it crashed on the redskin. All this while, old rum in the cup is growing more and more dominant, as I told you. But now, owing to the artificialized mentality of the victims and the immune population, its effects are cataclysmic. The alcohol appeal, held back for 5 generations, wakes like a cyclone. That's the horror I'm stressing. And Europe and Asia and the ghetto exploit America cold. The virginized people let go all holts and part with their all. It is no longer a domination, but an obsession, then a possession. Then come the leveled bayonets of Europe. Why so? Because the liquor's peddled out, sir, under armed European guards to the elderly, pleading American whites who pass over their title deeds, their businesses, factories, canals, skyscrapers, town lots, farms, little happy-looking homes, everything for it. You can see 'em wading into the oceans from Oyster Bay to Palm Beach under great flaring sunsets of national decay, to get at the stuff sooner. And Europe's got 'em by the gullet, peddling out the cases, or a single bottle at a time, to each according to his need, under the leveled bayonets of Europe. But why all the responsibility on Europe? I broke in. Surely some progressive American liquor trust would have been in the game from the first. Sure, but the appeal is national, and there are some things, sir, that the American people will not stand for. It was Europe or nothing. Otherwise, I could not have stressed the effect of the leveled bayonets of Europe. You see, those bayonets keep an order over the vast cathedrals of the new religions, the broken whiskey bottles round the altar, the priest himself, old and virginized, pleading and praying with his flock till, in the zenith of his agony and his denunciations, he too falls and wallows with the rest of them. Extravagant? No. Logic. And so it spreads from west to east, from east to west, up the dividing line where the European and the Asiatic Liquor Trust has parceled out the land of presumption. No paltry rum peddling at trading posts this time, but mile-long electric freight trains, surging and swooping from San Francisco and Boston with their 7,000 ton of alcohol, till they meet head-on at the liquor line, and you'll see a little American people fawning and a-pleadin' round their big wheels and trying to slip in under the leveled bayonets of Europe to handle and touch the stuff, even if they can't drink it. It's horrible. Horrible. The wages of sin, the death of the she-dominated sons of presumption. He stood up, his head high in the caravan's resonant roof, and mopped his face. Go on, I said. There ain't much more. You see, the de-virginized European and the immemorially sophisticated Asiatic, who can hold their liquor, spreading out and occupying the land. The signs in the streets register that, like a lava flow in Honolulu. There's just a hint, too, of the return of the great scourge and how it fed on all this fresh human meat. Just a few feet of the flesh rotten off the bones, same as when syphilis originated in the Renaissance epoch. Last of all, date not specified, there will be the herding of the few surviving Americans onto their reservation in the Yellowstone Park by a few slouching, crippled remnants of the Redskins. Get me? Presumption's ultimate reward. The wheel comes full circle, and the final close-up of Rum in the Cup with his hate mission accomplished. He stooped again to the photos in the bunk locker. I shot that, he said, when I was in the Yellowstone. It's a document to build up my last note on. There's just a party of tourists watching grizzly bears and raking in the hotel dump heaps. They keep 'em to show. That wet light hits back well off the clothes, doesn't it? I saw 6 or 7 men and women in pale-colored raincoats gathered with no pretense at pose in a little glade. One man was turning up his collar, another stooping to a bootlace, while a woman opened her umbrella over him. They faced towards a dimly defined heap of rubbish and tins. They looked unutterably mean. Yes, he took it back from me. That would have been the final note, the dominant resolving into a minor. But it don't matter now. Doesn't it? I said, stupidly enough. Not to me, sir. My church, I'm a fundamentalist, and I didn't read 'em more than half the scenario, started out by disowning me for aspersin' the national honor. A bunch of our home papers got holt of it next. They said I was a renegade and done it for dollars, and then the ladies on the social betterment and uplift committees took a hand. In your country, you don't know the implications of that. I'm 100% American, but I didn't know what men and women are. I guess none of us do at home, or we'd say so instead of playing at being American citizens. There's no law with us under which a man can be jailed for aspersin the national honor. There's no need. It got into the legislature, and one senator there, he spoke for an hour, demanding to have me unanimously and internationally disavowed by my maker, I presume. No one else stood by me. I'd been to the big Jew combines that control the movie business in our country. I've been to Hivelstein. He represents $67 million worth interest. He represents $67 million interests. They say he's never read a scenario in his life. He read every last word of mine aloud. He laughed some, but he said he was doing well in a small way, and he didn't propose to start up any programs against the chosen in New York. He said I was for an inquiry into my state of mind, and whether I was fit to run my own affairs. I saw a lawyer or two over that, and I came to a realizing sense of American law and justice. That was another one of the things I didn't know. It made me sick to my stomach, sir, sick with a physical and mental terror and dread. So I quit. I changed my name and quit 2 years back. Those ancient prophets and martyrs haven't got much on me and the things a democracy hands you if you don't see eye to eye with it. Therefore, I have no abiding place except this old caravan. Now, sir, we too are like ships that pass in the night, except, as I said, I'll be very pleased to tow you into Doncaster this morning. Is there anything about me strikes you in any way as deviating from sanity? Not in the least, I replied quickly. But what have you done with your scenario? Deposited it in the Bank of England at London. Would you sell it? No, sir. Couldn't it be produced here? I am 100% American. The way I see it, I could not be a party to an indirect attack on my native land. Once again he ground his jaws. There did not seem to be much left to say. The heat in the shut caravan was more and more oppressive. Time had stood still with me listening. I was aware now that the owls had ceased hooting, and that a night had gone out of the world. I rose from the bunk. Mr. Tarworth, carefully rebuttoning his raincoat, opened the door. "Good Lord God Almighty!" he cried with a child's odd reverence. "It's sun-up! Look!" Daylight was just on the heels of dawn, with the sun following. The icy blackness of the Great North Road banded itself with smoking mists that changed from solid pearl to writhing opal, as they lifted above the hedgerow level. The dew-wet leaves of the upper branches turned suddenly into diamond facets, and that wind, which runs before the actual upheaval of the sun, swept out of the fragrant lands to the east and touched my cheek, as many times it had touched it before, on the edge or at the ends of inconceivable experiences. My companion breathed deeply, while the low glare searched the folds of his coat and the sags and wrinkles of his face. We heard the faraway pulse of a car through the infinite, clean-born, light-filled stillness. It neared and stole round the bend, a motor hearse on its way to some early or distant funeral, one side of the bright oak coffin showing beneath the pall, which had slipped a little. Then it vanished in a blaze of wet glory from the sun-drenched road, amid the songs of 1,000 birds. Mr. Talworth laid his hand on my shoulder. "Say, neighbor," he said, "there's something very soothin' in the concept of death, after all." Then he set himself, kindly in efficiency, to tow me towards Doncaster, where, when the day's life should begin again, one might procure a new magneto make and break, that tiny 2-inch spring of finest steel, failure of which immobilizes any car.